Thanks so much for coming along. Do keep coming. There's some more seats in the middle here. Do keep coming down. Thanks so much for coming this lunchtime. It's really nice to have you here. This is the second Big Questions of term. And Big Questions, if you haven't been before, is a chance to think through and discuss a bit the big questions of life, really important and relevant topics to us. And today, Niv Lobo is going to be coming to speak to us about the concept of freedom. What is true freedom? Where can we find it? So the format that's going to take is we're going to have a short talk, then there'll be time for some discussion around tables, and then there'll be a question and answer time afterwards. Niv studied here at Cambridge, he studied English, and now he works with students in Southampton, regularly giving talks a bit like this. So please do keep texting in your questions for the question and answer time during the talk. The number that you need for that is on the lectern and on the pillars around the place, but also feel free to stick a hand up during the question time. So without further ado, Niv Lobo.
Great, well, good afternoon. It's really wonderful to see all of you here. I remember when I was a student many years ago, I used to love coming along to talks like these, and I had lots of fun, and I especially enjoyed the question and answer time, so please ask me some questions. I'd really enjoy that. Our question today is, freedom at university, how do we get it? And freedom is our watchword. If you ask people if they want freedom, it sounds like a stupid question, because what's the alternative? And who wants that? Everyone wants freedom, we're sure about that. But how do we get it? And where do we find it? Talk to enough people, and you'll find that freedom is an almost endlessly plastic word. It means what we want it to mean at the time. When I first arrived here at Cambridge, I more or less thought that the question answered itself. How to get freedom? Just be at university. All through school and teenage life, I assumed that just being at university would bring me all of the freedom that I'd been lacking up until that point. Because my working definition of freedom then was being free to choose to live just as you pleased. Being free to express yourself without being restricted by anything. No parents, no teachers, and more grandly, no prevailing religious or political orthodoxies or standards. No restrictions imposed on me from outside anymore. Free to be me and to express myself, whatever form that expression might take. And maybe that's the kind of freedom you're finding so far. Maybe you're looking to make the most of it. Well, 4 years after I arrived here as a fresher, that view of freedom was perfectly and beautifully encapsulated in a landmark meditation on this issue, a work of profound significance in cinema that I'm going to assume you've all seen. Let me quote from it. One of the characters finds freedom from restriction, and they say, "Don't let them in, don't let them see, be the good girl you always have to be, conceal, don't feel, don't let them know." Well, now they know. Let it go. Let it go. Can't hold it back anymore. Let it go. Frozen is a story of someone letting it go and finding freedom. After a long childhood of suppressing her magical gifts, Princess Elsa finally breaks free. She breaks free from her parents' terrible advice, conceal, don't feel, don't let it show. And as she abandons her childhood repression, she enjoys this heady rush of freedom, and she sings, "It's time to see what I can do, to test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free." The richest, truest freedom, Elsa tells us, is freedom to express yourself with nobody restricting your choices. In the light of which, any religious claim is going to sound seriously muted. At their worst, aren't religions among those voices which say conceal, don't feel, to our self-expression? And perhaps you're here wondering, why are the Christians talking about freedom? What kind of freedom could they possibly have? Well, it's against this backdrop that a 2,000-year-old saying makes a unique contribution. Jesus once claimed this. He said, "The truth will set you free." Now, at first glance, truth looks like an awkward, even dangerous guest to invite to your freedom party. Because if freedom is a plastic word, truth comes with hard edges. But I take it you're only here because truth interests you. I take it you're here as a student because you're willing to be challenged, open to learning from different perspectives. Whatever you study here, I take it you're here because you believe it's better to see things as they really are. And you'd rather pursue that than any number of happy delusions. At some level, you believe that the truth will set you free. Now, I want us to hear that claim as it was originally made. And we find it in a first century eyewitness account of Jesus' life called John's Gospel. Let me read this awkward encounter, and I put it up on the screen as well. To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Many people had started following and supporting Jesus. And speaking to them, he made this claim, "The truth will set you free." And they reacted just as badly as you or I would to the insinuation that they weren't free already. They counter with the fact of their ancestry. They genuinely believed that their ethnic and religious heritage secured them. They were chosen, favored, free. How could Jesus call them slaves? And Jesus' response cuts down deeper than their ethnic and religious claims. He says, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Jesus pulls the rug out from under that definition of freedom I offered earlier. Choosing whatever you like looks like freedom at first, but it actually ends in slavery if you make the wrong choices. When you make the wrong choices. The richest, truest freedom won't be found that way. Now, when Jesus talks about sin, it quickly becomes clear he isn't primarily talking about the wrong things we do. He's talking about the attitude beneath them that puts the wrong things at the center of our lives, to the attitude that makes those wrong choices, to our capacity to put ourselves at the center, to the exclusion of others, to privilege ourselves over anyone else. And given that capacity in us, unrestricted self-expression ultimately traps us, like a beached whale declaring freedom from the restrictions of the sea and finding itself trapped, unable to swim or survive. Freedom to express oneself can actually deprive us of a truer, richer freedom. And to see that, we can actually go back to Frozen and to Princess Elsa. If you know the film, what happens when she lets it go? She actually discovers another kind of captivity. The tragedy of the film, from the very beginning, is that Elsa is trapped behind a locked door, cut off from her sister, Anna. And the relationship they could have had is stifled. And it leaves Anna vulnerable and rejected, and it leaves Elsa frustrated and repressed. And then Elsa breaks free, and it actually changes nothing. Either way, she's still locked in. She just swaps her bedroom for an ice fortress. She's still a captive. And worse than that, she discovers that she's unleashing a winter that could destroy her kingdom. And so she discovers this and sings again, but this time distraught, "I can't be free." No escape from the storm inside of me. She lets it go, but she's still not free. Still a captive. Still can't build a snowman with her sister. And don't so many of us know that feeling? We embrace sexual liberation, but real intimacy eludes us. We go out partying, hoping to get our hands on the pleasure we've been promised, and yet it always seems at arm's length. And in fact, every drink we take just seems to make it more and more distant. Breaking free and letting go doesn't change things when you're a captive on the inside. But Frozen is a fairy tale, so it can't end like that, can it? And the way the film does end is actually a surprisingly profound reflection on how to get freedom. You see, the curse that's followed Elsa through the film can only be broken by true love. And it turns out that instead of some tall, dark, handsome prince, it's her sister Anna who performs the heroic act of true love. The self-sacrifice that she shows is the thing that resolves Elsa's lifelong search for freedom. And we see that the richest, truest freedom, it doesn't come as she expresses herself without any restrictions. It comes as she finds herself within certain restrictions. That's where she discovers that richest, truest freedom. To be specific, within a relationship. That's what a relationship is. It's a set of restrictions which enable greater freedom to know and be known by someone else. And it's in the context of that loving relationship that Elsa can finally be who she is. And when she sacrifices her freedom of total self-expression, she finds a better freedom. The freedom to lead her people. The freedom to escape a winter of solitude. The freedom to build a snowman with her sister. What a deeper look at freedom shows us is this. It's not about escaping restrictions. It's about picking the right ones. And that's as true here at Cambridge as it is anywhere else. In the summer, you exchange your freedom in the sun for hours in the library. But you find, in exchange, the freedom that comes when you're looking for a job and you have a good degree. You give up your freedom to hours of rehearsal. And in exchange, you find freedom on stage to enter fully into the story you're telling, the music you're playing. If you're a rower, you give up your freedom to sleep at normal sleeping hours and in fact be a normal person. But in exchange, I'm told, you find freedom on the river to work together, to pull ahead, to bump, whatever that is. But actually better than any of that is the paradoxical freedom that we find in relationships. You give up your freedom to be just who you are without anyone interfering. And in exchange, you find security, intimacy, joy. Which means that our topic, how to be free at university, actually distills down to this. What kind of relationship would enable me to be truly free? And this is where Jesus' claim is so liberating. He says to those who've been following him, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." What Jesus has to offer is the relationship that unlocks that richest, truest freedom. Deep down, I think we all suspect that real freedom is found in relationship. But actually, in our experience, there's also a lot of fear as we try to form relationships. What if we enter into relationships that let us down? That's what Anna discovers in the film. She sings, "Love is an open door." But the problem with open doors is that any scumbag can walk in, even if they look like charming princes at first. You see, entering into a relationship, that won't automatically bring freedom. It's about a relationship with the right person. But even when we find that right person, would they accept us? Would they let us in? What we're all craving is acceptance. We strive to form meaningful, deep relationships, but we are terrified of rejection. Think back to your Freshers' Week, whether that was a week ago or 3 years ago, or in my case, 7. Maybe you know what I mean. That desire to make really good friends, but also not to blow it with all these lovely people you're meeting. The desire to have people accept you for who you are, but also that Faustian pact you make, in which you hide the bits of who you really are, just in case they reject you. And you're thinking, what if people never let me in? What if they find the real me unpleasant, annoying? Or deeper than that, what if they reject the real me for good reasons? Not trivial, superficial ones, but somehow they see right through me, to all the things I don't want them to see, that I've been trying to hide. Even talking like that, it feels a bit uncomfortable. And you see, that's what makes this encounter Jesus has so provocative. What he says here about freedom and spiritual slavery kickstarts a discussion which ends with people trying to kill him. He's being very challenging. But when we see that the richest, truest freedom comes in relationships, and then we see that sin is that attitude putting ourselves at the center, excluding everyone else, then we can see why he uses such strong language. This is a bleak slavery, a self-centeredness problem that keeps me from joy with others. And so the problem with defining freedom as total self-expression is this. What about the darker parts I find in myself? Do I express those? And if I do, what freedom does that bring me? And who decides which bits of me I should express and which bits I shouldn't? And given that I so fear rejection, given that all of us fear that discovery of the darker parts of us, we actually end up taking our cue from what other people want from us, living out the script we think they might be writing. And we suppress in us all the things we think they might reject, which doesn't sound like freedom at all. But Jesus' offer poses a question. What if there were a relationship secure enough for you to be who you really are, where you never had to fear rejection? The relationship Jesus offers is one in which the truth sets us free. Truth about God, truth about the world, and the truth about us. He's honest enough to deal with that truth, to call us out on our wrong choices. But he's also loving enough to deal with it. And he offers freedom in the context of a loving relationship. In fact, the only one secure enough to give us room to express who we are. He says, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now, a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Jesus' radical claim is this: the God who is there sees every part of you, all of your very best efforts and your worst, every time you made the right choices, but also the wrong ones. And because he made everything, he does belong at the center. And we've pushed him out. We've suppressed that. And yet, for all our rejection of him, this God does not reject us. He wants us back, and he sends his Son to set us free. That's what's unique about this message. It's a relationship that is built on unconditional acceptance. The relationship in which you are fully known and still fully accepted. And you find the outrageous freedom of a child walking around their own home. What does that mean? It means having nothing to hide about what you've done. He knows it all. Nothing to prove, because this acceptance is unconditional. And nothing to lose, because you didn't get this acceptance with anything you did. In other words, you find the richest, truest freedom. Life with nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to lose, which takes the guilt out of your past, the pressure off your present, and the fear out of your future, so you can be free. And what we'd love to do is invite all of you to discover what freedom knowing Jesus might bring you. Here's what history shows us about Jesus. His generous offers of love are extended to all kinds of people. No one ever seems too messed up or broken for him. He claims to value you and the things you care about. And while we're used to all kinds of people saying all kinds of things they don't really mean, Jesus stands by his words, even when it costs him everything. He ends his life in a heroic act of true love. But unlike Frozen, this self-sacrifice isn't a fairy tale. It happened in real history with all the brutality and humiliation that crucifixion entailed. And he dies there, literally offering forgiveness to people as they reject him. As they're nailing him to the cross, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Pause on that, because it means that if he knows how to show us forgiveness at the point of our rejection of him, then a relationship with him is one in which our very worst choices can't ever jeopardize what we have. And we find limitless freedom to be who we are. It's a relationship that delivers what we've been longing for all our lives. Delivers in a way that nothing else can. And his earliest followers discovered that in the most remarkable way when 3 days after his death, they found his tomb empty. And they saw him again. That's the claim. That not even death could bring an end to Jesus, or the relationship that he offers, or the freedom that comes out of that. In fact, that death, the thing that curtails our freedom and our identity in every way, that brings an end to all of the plans we make and all of the hopes that we have, can't end the relationship Jesus wants to give us, can't stifle the freedom that he has to offer. And so the very first witnesses of this, they put 2 and 2 together. And where they had been trembling cowards, they went and filled their city, filled their empire, filled the known world with the claim that Jesus had given them freedom. A freedom that nothing, not even death, could take away. And so not all the persecution they faced, not all the threats to their lives could stop them, because they were free in Jesus, free indeed. So as I finish, let me ask, what do you make of that claim? What do you make of what Jesus is offering? Let me finish again with that claim. Jesus says, the truth will set you free. And that claim is really an invitation when you think about it. Because everything I've just said, you can trace back in history to the source, to this remarkable, world-changing man and his scandalous offer of freedom. Don't leave Cambridge without investigating what he has to offer. Because there's plenty of eyewitness evidence for you to look at. This man has left a historical footprint large enough for us to make up our minds. Investigate him and don't stop there. Because the richest and truest freedom, the kind that enables you to be who you really are, the kind we never find anywhere else, is on offer. You can be free from that captivity on the inside. Free indeed, with nothing to hide and nothing to prove and nothing to lose, if the truth can set you free. Thank you so much for listening to me. I think we've got time for discussion, and then after that, questions. So have a chat on your tables. Did anything I say make sense? Was any of it outrageous? Ask me a question. I'd love that.
Sorry to cut in there. If we could come back together, do keep texting in your questions. But first of all, have we got any questions from the floor? There should be a roving mic which will come around. Stick a hand up if you do. Okay, great. We'll go from the questions. So the secured relationship with Jesus does set us free in front of him, but what about in front of other people with whom we spend most of our time? Are we still not free for most of our time?
That's a really good question. And actually, I was saying on my table in the discussion bit that I feel like the freedom Jesus offers, discovering that is a fairly gradual thing. You'll notice in the words he said, if you hold to my teaching, then you're my disciples, then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So I suppose in some sense it really isn't kind of a total light bulb moment of instant and total liberty, but something I'm always discovering more of. I really love the TV show The West Wing. I'm really giving away my age, aren't I? But really good fun. There's a bit where the president has a health condition he doesn't reveal, and he's worried what other people will think of him. And one of his advisors says to him, what is it? The people that matter don't mind, and the people that mind don't matter. It's a pretty excellent moment where you just think, that makes so much sense. Now, I'm not saying that when people dislike you, that means nothing. But I am saying that actually, when you find someone who really loves you, that relativizes other people's opinions, doesn't it? And so, you know, that means that when I discover the security that a relationship with Jesus brings, that relativizes my fear of what other people might think of me. It kind of looses the shackles more and more of, am I going to perform to their standard? Am I going to please them? And that kind of relativism of sort of other people's opinions, that's a wonderful thing. I guess what I've been saying in this whole talk is, it is right to care what other people think of you. But when you meet the person who really matters and you find that he doesn't mind, he accepts you, then that brings freedom with everyone else as well. And frees you up not to perform to their expectations, but to love them, to be real friends with them. Thanks.
Great. Would anyone like to come back on that or to ask another question? Stick a hand up. Well, okay, let's go for another one then. So what about a hypothetical situation where everyone is fully expressed and accepted? Do we need God for that acceptance? Why can't society mature to appreciate the darker parts of human nature and accept them?
I suppose it's because, at some level, the darker parts of human nature lead to things that society cannot tolerate. Isn't that right? So that actually the darker desires I find in me, I'm about to get very personal here, so they mean that actually I do think less of people than I should. I do say things about them that I shouldn't. I even do things that would harm them because I put myself first. Actually, that is inimical to society functioning. So it's right for society to find a way to deal with the darkness in us. But until we find someone who can give us that total conviction we are fully accepted, society itself can't help us. All it can do is put us into different molds and grids. And I wonder if one of the questions I want to ask us as 21st century people is, are we aware of that? I think it's quite easy to look at the 19th century and before and think, oh goodness, they're so shackled by their values and norms and mores. But are we aware that something very similar happens to us too? It would be wonderful to find something that transcends our cultural, political, religious orthodoxies, something deeper than those things to ground our self-expression.
Brilliant, thank you. Anyone want to come back on that? Okay, do keep texting them in if you have more questions. So one more, how can we know that it's a relationship with Jesus that sets us free as opposed to some other God?
That's a really good question. And I remember this Tuesday I was in a boarding school in Bath talking to some people on the question of do all religions lead to God? And there was some really furious reactions to what I was saying, and I loved it because surely God is the main thing, and putting labels on all of this and specifying it, that kind of shrinks it all down, narrows it. Two things I want to say. Firstly, I think specificity really helps relationships. I can't believe I use the word specificity because that's such a kind of cold word. What I mean is, it matters who you're in a relationship with. My girlfriend is called Lucy. She would not enjoy it if I called her something else, like Tabitha. I know all these things about her. She wouldn't enjoy it if I don't know, deliberately took her to places she hated and did things she didn't like. It matters that she is who she is. So actually, when all these different religions say different things about God, to discover a real relationship with him, her, it, whatever, it does matter that God is what God is like. And so the question is, what is God like? Second thing to say is, where I wanted to end, if Jesus rose from the dead, then it doesn't just secure for us a freedom that not even death can touch. It also settles the matter. What's fascinating is the earliest Christians, when they were asked, why should we become Christians, or challenged, again and again, their response was not, well, close your eyes, pray really hard, and you'll just discover the freedom. And they actually said, no, something happened. And it didn't even happen in a corner. There were lots of witnesses. This man that we knew was crucified in front of many people, and then his tomb was empty. And we saw him again. Lots of us saw him again, and we're willing to die for that. And in fact, these people saying that were not treated as kind of benign lunatics out on the street trying to give out flyers, which may be what we look like today, I don't know. But actually, they were treated as a threat that had to be put down. We're left with a huge historical puzzle. How did they get off the ground in the first place? What was powering their proclamation of this homeless carpenter's son? And they would say to a man and a woman, the fact he rose from the dead, and we saw it. Do you see how that changes the discussion on the polarity of religions? If that happened, then the discussion looks different. Anyone want to come back on that?
Anyone else have another question from the floor? Yeah.
Thanks.
That way. Oh.
You said that once you were free in a relationship with Jesus, you were actually free to love other people. Why does it make you free to love other people? What is it about that causes love?
Great question. I think what I've been finding more and more is that sometimes what people want and what people need are different. Do you find that? Sometimes I want to watch Netflix and eat crisps. But what I need is to do my job and or do some exercise or something like that. It's a trivial, silly example. But actually, if I'm always seeking to please people, then I'll always want to give them what they want, which may not necessarily be what they need. Does that make sense? And to love someone truly is to give them what they need. It's why you owe your parents a debt of gratitude that they didn't let you watch TV all night and only eat chocolate, which you probably would have wanted to do at some point. I know I did. They loved you too much for that. Do you see what I mean? Being set free from having to perform for their expectations means you can love them by meeting the needs they have rather than just the wants. Anything more on that?
Brilliant. Maybe time for one more down here.
Great.
Firstly, thank you so much for speaking. It was really great. I just wondered if you could bring any examples from the Gospels or the New Testament of the extent to which Jesus sets people free, physically, spiritually, if you want to.
Oh, that's lovely. How long do we have? I'll try and keep it brief. There's an amazing moment in this John's Gospel that I've been quoting, and maybe there's some of these around, at the back. Do take one. It's in chapter 4. Jesus meets a woman from Samaria, different tribe, and like I say, she's a woman, different gender, and everything means they should not be talking to each other. In fact, we discover that this woman has a real checkered past, and by the standards of her day and maybe even ours, she's something of a reject. She's not really welcomed in the town where she's from. She has a conversation with Jesus, which I'm not going to tell you about, but by the end of it, she leaves the water jar she came to the well for and goes back to the town full of people who she knows don't accept her because she has something to tell them. She's been set free from what they might think of her, set free from her pressing needs at the time, set free from her quest for satisfaction, which has actually only brought her so much pain. I love that story because I identify a lot with her, and I think a lot of us might. So I recommend that one. I find it brilliant. Check it out. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Niv, so much. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. I'm sorry if we didn't get round to answering your question, but please feel free to stick around on your tables and keep chatting. And Niv is going to be around here afterwards. Chat to him too. Just now as we finish, if you could pick up the feedback forms on your table. We love hearing what you think of today's question. Any feedback would be appreciated. And there's a box to tick that says, I'm interested. That's if you'd like to think a little bit more deeply about these questions, leave your CRS ID and your name, and someone from the Christian Union will get in contact with you. Also, on your way out there, you'll see some books, including the Uncover that Niv mentioned here. They're free for you to take away, so do have a look at them as you go. They're written by Christians, and they're intended to help you think through more these topics. Big Questions is going to be back next week. We're going to be looking at the question of whether the Bible is reliable, whether or not we can trust it. But for now, there'll be snacks coming around your tables. Please do feel free to stay and chat as long as you like.